Over the bike, we have lots of different places where parts are machined or billeted to look or ride a certain way. When we think of small, intricate, delicate machine work, oftentimes you might think of your fork with its clever architecture of valves and circuitry. But if you want to see some really fine work, looking inside the rear hub is a good place to start. To explore this topic and to celebrate the release of the Hydra 2 hub, we've teamed up with Industry 9, or i9 to you and me, for this video. On a modern mountain bike hub, you have a few key parts. There is the hub axle, which takes the rider's weight. This sits on these bearings here, of which there are two sets. There are the hub bearings, which take the rider's weight, then the free hub bearings, which let the free hub spin at a different speed than the hub bearings. In the front hub, you'll obviously have those two large bearings, but not that second set, because, well, there isn't much else to a front hub. Hubs are made to very particular tolerances for two main reasons. Firstly, there's the clamping force at the frame axle that makes the inner race of the bearings want to work inwards. So you need to get that spacing exactly right, otherwise you're going to get a hub that eats parts like Pac-Man at a bearing buffet. And that requirement is only enhanced when you think about the twisting forces going through a rear hub and the large amount of leverage something like a bottom bracket has over the hubs thanks to that long chainstay. So it means there can be a huge amount of twisting forces when we're really cornering and driving the rider's weight through the entire bike. The hub and free hub assembly are important because they let our bikes be driven forward by us, but also let us coast and freewheel. When talking about hubs, you might hear things like points of engagement, ratchets, pulls, springs, and of course, the ever-present degree reference. But what does this all mean? Well, after some extensive research and hours Googling, I'm able to tell you that there are 360 degrees of rotation in a circle. Now, a free hub will have a set amount of engagement. So you divide that 360 number by the points of engagement, and that's how you get the amount of float between each point. This is how far the hub rotates before loading up and engaging. If you have 1 degree of engagement, that's because you would have 360 points per rotation of the free hub, and so on. So a high degree of float means that engagement is going to feel less instantaneous and can leave you ratcheting through thin air as you search for a gear on tech climbs. A high engagement can mean that the transition between free coasting and accelerating is immediate wherever you are in the rotation. When the i9 Hydra 1 launched, which is this one here, it was noted for having insanely high engagement. It had a massive 690 points and just half a degree of float between them. Now, the new Hydra 2, which is this one here, also has a very, very high point of engagement, but a thicker axle with a torque rating that's suitable for EMTBs. It has a whopping, and this is absolutely insane, 870 points of engagement, which is just 0.41 of a degree between them, which is, I'm going to put this up to the mic, that. Typically, when you think of a ratchet and pull, as the wheel spins, the pulls click into place. Now, this would make it very, very difficult to have 870 teeth on one single drive ring inside what is essentially a relatively small mountain bike hub. So designers and engineers are becoming increasingly sophisticated in how they extract the maximum amount of engagement out of less teeth. For instance, this hub has 145 teeth on the ratchet drive ring, but 870 points of engagement. Well, how does it do that? Well, we're going to reach for the cutaway because they do it with some quite clever thinking. They do this by offsetting the pulls from one another. Now, this means the pulls work in conjunction with each other, with each one actually having 3 engagement teeth on it. So they can sort of offset the needs. And if you look very carefully, you can look and listen and you'll get a sense of how the ratchets are working in conjunction as a team with one another. Because sometimes you don't even see the pull click into place at all, but you can hear one of its friends doing the work. And that's a really important part of how you can maximize more points of engagement from less teeth on the ratchet ring. Why is engagement important though? And is it the same as having our bodies and bike baked into a fixed relationship between the differing demands of the suspension, the drivetrain, and the rider? Well, Today we want to explain why our hubs will play an important role in the feeling of our bikes and suspension, but sometimes passing out the information is harder than you might think. But with that, I want to go outside and talk a little bit about the stuff we ride our bikes on. Free coasting is a quintessential part of the cycling experience, save for a few lunatics in New York City who roll around with their handlebars 3 inches wide. On mountain bikes particularly, we need to be able to coast because when we're riding technical trails, we have varying amounts of ground clearance, and spinning at 200 RPM down here would be something of a disaster. When we think about our bikes and riding them on this style of terrain, there's so much that we can do as riders to maximize the energy we're putting through the bike, through the suspension, into the contact patch to make our riding not only safer, but faster. However, all that energy from the contact patch can then sometimes come up back through the suspension, through the bike, and to the rider. This is what we call pedal feedback. Now, there are 2 contributing factors which are the main culprits to my mind of what causes pedal feedback, but truthfully, there are a myriad of other factors. But let's start with problem number 1. The first thing is chain flail. Now, despite what this sounds like, this isn't a medieval weapon of chivalry, but rather what happens when you're riding quite fast and the chain is shaking up and down. This doesn't sound like much, but at high speeds it can have quite a pronounced effect, especially on the ratcheting you might feel through your feet. And it's why some racers are not only running high pivot bikes with idlers, but also some kind of chain management device, such as an O-chain, to try and reduce that feedback at very high frequency vibrations. You might have even seen some other brands that run a high pivot with an idler also having a secondary idler sitting below the cranks. And it's all part of managing that moving metal mass. Pedal feedback or pedal kickback is a very interesting idea to think about, and as such has provided much forum fodder over the years as people argue about its influence on our mountain bikes. Let's try and understand it in really simple terms. As we compress a full suspension mountain bike and the axle goes backwards, your bike undergoes something called chain growth. As that chain comes under more tension, it pulls at your feet, meaning you get some feedback through the pedals and that ratcheting motion. Now, this isn't an issue when you're coming down a rough trail at high speed because the free hub is not only letting you free coast, but is doing a great job at separating those forces from your bike and body, and your suspension can work nice and freely. The issue is when you're going at quite a slow speed and undergoing some deep pronounced impacts. That high axle speed, using all that travel very quickly, means the free hub can't really keep up, and at the slow speed it's not already up to speed and spinning. That means that under those large impacts your feet get a big tug. So let me try and explain this and show this very clearly. I've actually taken the shock off my bike. I've teleported back to the studio after what was quite a terrifying incident involving a hanging bike, a snapping branch, and Tom the cameraman nearly no longer being with us. For reasons I can't quite explain that have something to do with continuity, I've still got my helmet on though, but I don't really get it. But it is a good place to explain the problem. The free hub does a really good job of separating the drivetrain and suspension forces when the wheel is moving quickly. And there might be a bit of pedal feedback, but not nearly as much as if that wheel is static. Now this is going to vary depending on what gear you're in and things like that, but largely speaking, we don't have the same issues with pedal feedback at a higher trail speed. So this is going to be really prevalent at times where the trail speed is lower and suspension action is going deeper and faster. And whilst I'm thinking about that, it's also a great time to say that this video is supported by i9 and made in partnership with them. We're using their high engagement hubs as an example. However, all the scripting is controlled by me and all the ideas are my own. But is there one simple answer to this problem? Swipe me back. The solution, often touted, is going to a low engagement hub, but I would argue it's not as simple as it's often made out to be. The issue with going to a low engagement hub is that there's more rotation at the cassette because there's more slack in the system. Now this directly contributes towards the chain flail issue at higher speeds that we spoke about earlier on. So this means it doesn't solve the problem of pedal feedback when descending, but you still give away a lot of performance essentially when going uphill because you don't have that immediate drive meaning that slack can leave you searching for a gear as you ratchet up technical sections. It is a very personal preference though, and I think hub manufacturers acknowledge that as such by offering different amounts of engagement for their hubs to suit the rider's preference. Now, I would say, for my 2 cents, find an engagement level that you like and then try and find another solution for the issue of chain growth. And we're lucky because right now in the bike industry, we're getting more solutions than ever. And by combining those two things, that's how we're going to maximize the performance of our bikes, not only for the individual, but as a general trend going forward. Thank you very much for watching, and get in the comments to let us know about your feelings on pedal feedback. Has it got better or worse over the years as the things we've been riding our bikes on have changed? Thank you, and we'll catch you next time.